Well, good morning, everybody. I am Robert Bell, and I am coming to you on behalf of our efforts for inclusion in the South Pacific. I am the chairman of a business called KlickEx, and today I've been entrusted with sharing you all of the wonderful work we've been doing down there. So first of all, I wanted to talk about who are we. We have been fanatical implementers of financial inclusion platforms across the Pacific. In the beginning, we started building systems for banks to lower costs for the unbanked, and to get people into banking as much as we could. We then expanded and grew into MNO mobile money transfer platforms, which we did in partnership with the United Nations Development Program. Through that platform, we became exposed to retail and customer-facing businesses, particularly as a phenomenon called de-risking started to deeply impact our region. We reached out directly and started to build platforms, including KYC and biometric identification services, to reach consumers directly where other financial institutions were having difficulty. And finally, we have got through to the final stage of where we are at now, which is sort of our achievement, our crowning achievement, which is building platforms for central banks themselves. And while I'm sort of here to talk about the more recent work, it's important to talk about where we began and who we are. For context. So the way we are known in the Pacific is through many of these brands. So our umbrella over the last nearly 6 or 7 years has become quite a broad spectrum of financial inclusion tools. This is important because financial inclusion is usually an ecosystem. So there's not really a one-prong attack that we've been able to develop success. It's been through a broad application of various units and business divisions and innovations. So looking at my screen here to the top left, you're getting more of the wholesale systems. So Guardian is a KYC and transaction monitoring service, particularly with respect to sanction checking, screening, OFAC, and PEP services. Worldwide down the bottom is the statistical monitoring system. FOSNet is the service for central banks, which is RTGS systems, ACH systems. Going to the middle is the Pacific Development Foundation, which helps us fund these into countries where budgets may not exist for these things. And going to the bottom right, you see there we actually get involved in companies that build homes as well. So we're all the way from a central bank system right the way down to providing people houses so that they can get mortgages on buildings and constructions that we trust. So that's a very broad spectrum of where we impact in our outreach. And each of these divisions here, I'm going to go into a slide that looks quite complicated, has actually been hand-built by us. So over the years, we started with this, what was KlickEx, which was a multi-currency regional settlement system for real-time payments cross-currency with banks. And we then found through the evolution of the progress that we actually had to build the KYC systems, the transaction monitoring services, the agent network services, mobile money systems, insurance as well, which I'll come to a bit later, hedge the pension programs that we do. And then as we got more and more in depth into our countries, we needed not just agent networks to do cash payouts, for example, for remittances, but we started building interbank settlement systems and payment services as well. So for context again, where is all of this happening? Well, we're from the South Pacific, which is a ridiculously huge part of the world. We're about 60% of Asia Pacific surface area, but we only have a population of about 650,000. So to put that in context, to get a population density to area ratio, you have to look at Europe's population 3 million years ago to get that number of humans per square kilometer. That's including oceans in our region, of course, or if Africa was populated by just 210,000 people. So you can imagine the economies of scale don't really exist. And the outreach or the appetite for big players in other parts of the world to come to the Pacific doesn't really exist. So we've had to literally get out there and build everything, including the rails. So this has been our challenge, bringing financial inclusion to the remote guardians of the Pacific Ocean. A little bit about the Pacific Ocean. We still have around 80% of our target adults are unbanked. Now, this doesn't now mean through our efforts, we've got them onto some form of digital platform in some shape or form, but getting reach through formal banking sector is still quite hard. The median formal workforce per country is only about 10,000 to 20,000 adults. And GDP per capita in our region is somewhere between $1,200 and $5,000 per year. So we're not really dealing with a huge economic engine and disparate across about 28 different countries. So there are a lot of challenges to getting into those people and serving them with products that helps them. So how have we been doing? Well, our household penetration is actually very good. For about the first 8 years of the service, we were nearly 100% of the transition to digital services. Mostly that was led through our cross-border remittances from New Zealand to Australia. And we've had about 68% market share in some of our mobile money products and outreach to the households. Now, bearing in mind, there is only about 500,000 adults across the region that we're targeting. And we have about 150, and it's approaching actually 200,000 now, KYC profiles on our system. So we almost don't meet an adult in the Pacific when we roll out a new product that we haven't met before. I just wanted to talk about the foreign exchange and the direct aid into the Pacific that we have facilitated. So $1.2 billion in actual cash sales that we've had in this region. To put it in context again, that's about 100% of the GDP of the countries that we primarily serve. So if you can imagine that if we were operating somewhere like Europe or America, that's about 18 trillion euros is the GDP of Europe, or about 25 trillion in the US. So for our scale, we're doing really well out there. So with all of these things, how do we stay focused? Well, our focus is very clear on one specific goal. We want to take household passive income and increase that per household to what GDP per capita was in about 2008, which we use for our reference here. So that's taking passive income up by about 1,000%. We do just about anything we can to achieve that goal. Again, that can be a very tricky goal, a very broad goal. So we've broken it down into 3 steps. Step 1 is building facilities to get financial inclusion, not only reasons for people to join the formal sector, but the facility and the channels for them to do that. Stage 2, we rather cheekily called osmosis, which is the slow flooding of financial inclusion systems out into the nooks and crannies of our economies, getting it all the way out there. And our third goal, which we are due to begin in about 2025, is regional harmony. And that's building integration between all the financial institutions, national systems across the Pacific region, above and beyond the extent that we have already done this. This is actually my favorite slide. It's probably the most busy, so I apologize for that. Financial inclusion, which is our first goal. Our target was to increase passive income by about $750 per capita. Within about a year, we had done that. So we actually received lowered remittance costs was our main target for this by about $960 per family per annum across our initial pilots. So really pleased with that. The second is largely through pensions and insurance systems. So that is to deliver income shock. For example, when cyclones wipe out annual income for a year, we want to have income replacement insurance across most of the households. And then linking the ability to pay out through banks and through mobile phone carriers. So we are about 60% of the work done on that, a little bit slowed down by COVID-19, but I'll come back to that a bit later. And then our final phase is adding about $1,000 per annum per family by joining up the region economically. So it's building trans-regional platforms for insurance coverage and payment systems and economic welfare, e-commerce shopping, all those sort of things. So again, our challenge is always to stay focused. So our mission here is to provide trusted services that lower costs for banks and central banks and consumers. And we want to lead the world in our field. It's a little bit of a play here. You know, the Pacific is at the front of the international date line. So we literally wake up every day before everybody else in the world. And so we want to take that through to financial inclusion as well and be a world leader. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So this has been our journey on a technical detail. So we've built literally national mobile money systems, digital payment platforms, remittance services, worker employee payment systems and benefit systems, agent network shopping, card services. We built one of the largest card services in one country where we are pretty much 90% or 100% of domestic card processing. Then in our region, the de-risking hit. So we became a little bit limited to offer payment or transactional services. So we went into doing economic biometric ID and more soft services, including a very large blockchain project that we rolled out with IBM 3 years ago. And now that de-risking is abating and we've got a bit bigger, we're going back into the wholesale insurance system. So we broker direct insurance policies out of Lloyd's of London for micro insurance, pension systems, and national payment systems too. Our next evolution is to involve an outreach through a pilot program, which we did in collateral-free lending. So this is micro lending over the course of 5 years, where we teach people how to take money and then repay it at reasonable interest rates so they can build up an internal credit score. We did a pilot last year, and we're looking at combining all of these things under a formal, fully fledged commercial banking license, hopefully early next year. Now, in the final part of the presentation, I just want to talk about those tools that we have and the pillars that they represent. First of all is the enablement of regulators. So this is BOSNet, our domestic payment systems, RTGS, ACH systems, bond trading, foreign exchange, and currency management services, the guard and sanction screening and worldwide transaction monitoring, and of course support from the Pacific Development Foundation, which KlickEx actually funds, to get these into more and more countries. And then once we have those electronic systems in place, we can activate banks through payment systems, pension systems, bill payments, utility services, and insurance. And where banks aren't able to reach out because they don't have the same agenda that we might have, we build retail platforms as well that do that outreach directly. So again, keeping this very simple, we do this through the Pacific Development Foundation, where this can't be rolled out on a commercial basis in every country, because we, through the Pacific Development Foundation, believe that every country deserves world-class financial infrastructure, industrial strength financial security, and the systems to include all of its citizens. So that's a mission we really support. Again, it can be a very complicated mission, but our job is to make it simple. So what does success mean for us? Success means 16 new mobile money countries, 5 new central banking systems, 28 integrated pension services across the Pacific, and possibly 16 direct banking licenses if we really get very lucky. And all of that is to achieve our goal of having 100% of 2008's GDP per capita as the passive income per household. Now, I'm not sure how we're doing on time exactly, but I have a few case studies if I have a little bit more time to go through. Otherwise, I'm happy to stop here and take some questions.
Thank you very much, Robert, for this great presentation. I will start asking if Giselle, Margarita, or Nasir have any doubt or question to ask you, and then we will continue with our global audience.
Okay,
Nasir?
No trouble with it. Is there time to run through the case studies first a little bit? They're just about 30 seconds each.
Sorry, Robert?
Is there a little bit of time to go through these case studies, or I didn't hit time on my thing? If not, that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so first I wanted to talk about 2020. This has been quite an interesting year given the global disruption, particularly to migrant workers, which really affect the Pacific. So the Pacific is up to 30% dependent on its GDP from overseas payments. When New Zealand in particular went into lockdown, where a lot of our financial flows come from, we had to create for 86 branches across New Zealand a completely digital service. So we managed to go in 6 days into a fully automated system with no cash drops. So there's no dropping off cash packets at other banks. We added digital financial inclusion partnerships this year across 7 additional Pacific countries, in addition to our initial 4. Again, I mentioned earlier that we now do card payments in receive side countries, and that is at the moment still surviving and doing 90% of tourism spending where that's possible. We launched a new COVID-19 workplace medical insurance. So that means workers coming out of the Pacific now, coming into relatively COVID-19 free New Zealand and a little bit Australia, now have not only medical insurance for their work contracts, but also COVID-19 quarantine coverage. We have converted about 80% of our employees to work from home as they wish. And there's an additional launch of the Tongan digital check interchange. So that means bank staff don't have to meet at the central bank face-to-face every day. It can now be done electronically. We increased our access to women on digital solutions by about 18%. And this, again, really excited about this micro-lending collateral free program, where we start people lending as little as $5 and getting them to pay in micro payments back over the course of about 18 months. The limit that we're prepared to lend to people goes up to about 25,000 in local currency. So that's really building people. Not the money doesn't matter so much to us, it's the getting the repayments on time and learning and seeing a whole long list of successes and making on-time payments, and they build up a credit with us that they can use either with us, we can publish it or not, but we have the best information on this. So that's really exciting. Our national payment system, we built in very close partnership with the National Bank of Tonga, the Reserve Bank of Tonga, RTGS, check processing system, bond trading, FX services for the central bank to use and for all commercial banks to begin using. We've deployed the national card processing system, which connects domestic and international cards to card schemes, and we process all of the card payments in that country domestically. For COVID-19, again, coming back to this, it's about $100 million of policy coverage we've launched. Again, remember the scale of the Pacific and how small it is. So we're expecting that to grow to about $900 million of policy coverage over the course of next year as COVID-19 hopefully abates, but we don't know. We actually were involved in organizing 250,000 COVID-19 test kits for the Pacific, but we were the first in the world, we think, to reject certain types of tests where false positives were quite high. So we were quite proud of not bringing in junk in the end. And the cash to digital locations is really important because we not only did this for our agents, but any other money transfer organization in Australia and New Zealand that needed our help, we actually onboarded them as well. So we became a crisis management center for not just ourselves, but other people. And talking about gender inclusion, just some quick stats here. About 60% of our customers, frequent customers, are women, and about 76% of payments are either involving to or from women in some form. Our planned bank has about 84% of locations are run by female staff, and more than 92% of our agent locations are staffed or managed by women. And this usually begins with wives or partners of the regional cross-border worker scheme. And we sort of, when the husbands are away, we formalize them and turn them into a little business so they can help too. And this is common across the lending products that we did a pilot with last year. So we're seeing about the same ratios of women sign up to our platforms too. Now, also we did a blockchain program. Oh yes.
Robert, sorry for interrupt you. Sorry for interrupt you, but we completed the 15 minutes for the technical presentation, and in order to have enough minutes for receiving question and impression for the panel of judges, our global audience, we can start with the questions. So thank you very much for the presentation. I will invite first Nasir, Giselle, or Margarita, in case they have any doubt or question.
Okay, I'll kick off then again. Apologies. Thank you very much, Robert. I've heard of your business. I know that it has a good reputation. Fantastic. Well done on your journey. Here's my question. I'm going to be bluntly honest. I don't get what the product is that you're pitching. You seem to be doing, if I may say, a vendor pitch, i.e. we can create all this infrastructure for you depending on what you need, rather than a specific product pitch for, say, other countries. So what is it you see as being an entry point or a product that you would offer as a solution?
Very good point, and you're 100% correct. Our story has definitely been a broad spectrum one. So here, I would very much encourage people to take interest in our national payment systems. So if you don't have the RTGS or the ACH system or real-time interbank domestic systems, I would suggest you contact us about this. Now, these are complicated in implementation, but actually very simple products. So those are the systems that I think, if you don't have them as a country, get them first, and then from that you can build backwards to all these other fabulous services. But you need those core payment infrastructure systems to kickstart your inclusion if you don't have them. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you, Robert. That's much more specific. So that was...
Okay. Yeah, and it's worth saying as well. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I might just say it's worth saying as well, you know, when we come with a national payment service, you know, we know how to integrate those with KYC systems and mobile money interoperability services and agent locations. So a little bit, we're very specifically focused on the Pacific, so we have a regional focus there. But if there's interest from outside the region, we'd certainly like to hear about it. But you know, in terms of total drop-in packages for central banks and their commercial bank direct relationships, and even the MNOs and beyond that, you know, we've had really good success out in the Pacific.
Thank you, Robert, for the presentation. I think my question is kind of similar to the one of Nasir. It's regarding the product, one or several products. I see several products that you presented. I know the core one is the payment systems, but do you have a direct relationship with the population, or is it just with banks and the central bank? And the other question is related to the product that you're offering. How do you think those products can reduce the gap, the gender gap? And also, how do you think they can improve youth and refugees' financial inclusion? Thank you.
I just had to take notes because that was a very good question. In terms of the relationships we have, obviously the National Payment Service goes in via the central bank. So the central bank then implements that system, and then the commercial banks, by mandatory decree, adopt that and use those systems. We started off actually with our interbank product, which was a direct relationship with the commercial banks, not just in one country, but in multiple countries, to build a real-time clearing system. So that's moved your Tongan panga to Samoan tala to New Zealand dollars to US dollars or whatever like this. So we started off as that. It was a wholesale service. And I mentioned very briefly, and I'm sorry, there was just a torrent of information there, that when de-risking started to happen, a lot of the smaller commercial banks in the Pacific lost their correspondent accounts or connections to you know, major currencies. So we then stepped in and became the clearing service. And as they withdrew their products from New Zealand and Australia, we actually onboarded those products ourselves. So we're one of the very few, and I can't think of any others, but I don't want to say that we're the only one that does everything from, you know, one of our divisions do KYC on individual unit people, so they can come in, they do their thumbprints and get biometrics scanned in our agent networks that are branded KlickEx, all the way through to we do the wholesale FX platforms and interbank clearing systems and credit card processing systems right at the top end of the scale as well. So in the Pacific, there was not a lot of rails, there were not a lot of systems to join onto or platforms to engage to become a point solution for this or this or this. In order to do mobile money or remittances, we had to build the cross-border services. We had to build the foreign exchange markets, which were basically ad hoc at the time. We had to then build the digital platforms, and we had to build the agent networks, and we had to build the ability to interoperate them with ATMs and card systems. So yeah, it's a very broad thing, and our relationships are quite universal. So in terms of the products, your next question was, how did these impact, or how do these advantage financial inclusion or reaching the youth? Some of our markets, upwards of 30% of the population are under the age of 15, and certainly 70% are under the age of about 40. So also in the Pacific, we have a really interesting dynamic where social media and digital services are very highly penetrative in the Pacific, as due to you know, close cultural ties and family networks, I guess. And so we had really very fast uptake of digital products, particularly amongst the younger, but not exclusively. about getting people in, and we've seen really a change from sort of subsistence village activity into understanding and being able to manage the timing of your remittance receipts coming in from New Zealand or Australia to maximize access to the best exchange rates. So our gender processes, we don't particularly have a solution targeted just for women. How do we get women in? How do we get young people in? We just target generally people that don't have services now, and it just so happens that the ones signing up fastest do happen to be female. They're not always the largest users of the system. The RSC, the regional workers that go on a 6-month contract in New Zealand, they put the most volume through. But in terms of sustained use and consistently high engagement, it's female users sending more and more granular payments home to buy goods or services or requesting things from the market. So while we don't really target any gender group particularly, we are hitting all the right buttons about getting those that are excluded in. Does that answer everything?
Sorry, can I ask one more quick question to you, Robert?
Yes, sir.
What was the last payments infrastructure or payments rails implementation you did, and how long did it last from start to finish?
That's a good question. Some of them overlap. So we actually began the national service in Tonga. Initially, it dates back to sort of documentary beginnings in 2018. It was about July. We did the agreement. I think we had a platform up and running in about 90 days. Then we had a 1-year testing and trial and feedback process. So that was basically the expansion of the system. That lasted, I think, about a year with running in dual services. So we ran the national payment system dual service from the cloud, and it's at the moment it's in the finalization phase. It's about 18 months later, going into full on-island service. So this is dropping the entire payment system, pulling it out of the cloud, putting it in country, so it's not accessible from any overseas source, and putting it into the central bank with the fiber optic thing. So that was about a 2-year process, including considerable expansion of scope towards the end. We did the Tuvalu card system. That was about 6 months end to end, get it set up and running,
okay.
And that included hardware systems. Is that too much detail?
Well, let me maybe put it this another way. If you were to go to a larger country, say, I don't know, Philippines, somewhere else in Southeast Asia, what would be your estimate to say put in core infrastructure, the payment rails, essentially, from start to finish?
Yeah, a really good question too. It depends on the readiness to receive the service. We can literally drop in a platform in about, let's say, 6 weeks. Generally, what takes time is setting up VPNs to transfer core code into the service securely. Let's say, I would say 3 to 6 months to get a live system running, at least in test mode, and then give us another 6 months to run it in parallel with existing services to make sure we haven't missed any core functions and any customizations required. But usually with under a year, I would think.
Thank you, Robert.
We have the last question from Margarita, and I will request, Robert, if you can answer in 30 seconds. So sorry for that, but we are running out of time. Yes. Okay, Margarita, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I want to know, you say KlickEx is a regional focus. So there is a place for expansion in another regions?
Yeah, again, this goes back to our history and trying to keep this 30 seconds. So we did a lot of consulting in Africa, East Africa with the SADC community. We spent some time looking at implementation possibilities in West Africa. We had locations in Singapore and Malaysia a while ago, but really de-risking slowed that down, which you guys are familiar with what de-risking is. But now that that's sort of in the past and the technologies are much more mature, we can drop those out, and we've got more technical support packages where we can drop that in. For example, let's not pick on the Philippines, but let's say we go in there. We don't need our core staff to do that. It's much more plug and play ready now rather than bespoke, still discovering what people want from financial inclusion.
Thank you.
Robert, thank you very much for your great presentation.